Well, welcome and happy Inclusive Schools Week. This is a wonderful way in which to kick off our 8th annual Inclusive Schools Week. Some folks usually ask, well, what do you mean when you talk about an inclusive schools? And what you're about to see in Dan's film is a school that's on this journey of becoming more inclusive. No one quite really arrives because diversity and changes. But when we talk about inclusive schools, it's a school that is both welcoming of and capable of educating the naturally diverse population of young who come to its doors. Very plain and simple. And in all ways, inclusive schools are not just about children and youth with disabilities. It's about that natural diversity. And as you all know, we struggled with that in so very many ways, both in schools and in society. And so we started Inclusive Schools Week 8 years ago as an event, an opportunity to both celebrate how far we have come along in making our schools more inclusive, but also how far we've have to go.
Inclusive schools, just general awareness, because obviously it can't be contained to a week. And I think too often, we look at this as a program or a one-year effort. It's really just a philosophy around what we want education to be. And I hope that we see education as something that welcomes every child into our schools, regardless of their individual needs or idiosyncrasies. What I'm going to do is very briefly, because I'm excited to show you the film. There's a lot more to talk about once you watch the film, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So very briefly tell you why I made this film, because it's kind of a lot to ask your family to be the subjects of a documentary film, which is what you're going to see in here. So really this started almost 5 years ago. Samuel was actually doing quite well, but was getting strep throat again and again. And my wife and I decided this is ridiculous. Every time he gets strep throat, because of his underlying health issues, he would go to the hospital because he couldn't hold down food. So we said, let's do a tonsillectomy. And we did that up at Dartmouth, but it didn't go quite as planned, and he actually developed a really severe pneumonia coming out of that, which, as you may imagine, any kid with kind of underlying health fragility, these things are never as simple as you hope they'll be. So he was in the intensive care unit for about 2 weeks up at Dartmouth, and while we were there, his neurologist, who was the attending, actually said to me, you should document this. You should take your background as a photojournalist, I've been doing it for almost 20 years at the time, and apply that to telling your story about what it's like to have a child with a disability. And that kind of blew my mind, because I wasn't thinking anything about photography at that point, I was just thinking about the health of Samuel. But it was actually a really great way to start to burn off some of this nervous energy I was feeling, some of this anxiety Betsy and I were feeling around not just that immediate health crisis, but this whole maze of disability and inclusive education that we were kind of figuring out. They don't, unfortunately, hand you a playbook when you have a child with a disability saying, here's what you need to do. You have to really figure it out from scratch. Right at that same time, I was actually going through this year-long program at the place I now work, the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, that taught parents how to be advocates for their kids. It was like a boot camp on disability advocacy. So for a year, every weekend, 1 week in a month, you'd come together with families from around the state and talk about the legal issues, the educational issues, the healthcare issues, public policy around disability rights and inclusive education. It was an incredible program, and it really got us thinking about inclusion as kind of the key variable that was going to give Samuel a happy life, because schools are the cornerstone of community. We all, I think, could agree with that in this room. And if you're not a part of your school, how could you possibly be part of your community? And that's, I think, to me, at the core of inclusion. So that was going on. And the third and final thing I'll tell you about that happened at the same time, amazingly, was I was having a photo exhibit that was going around some high schools of my work as a photojournalist. And I went to one high school in New Hampshire called Holderness. And the students really liked the work that I had done, but they said, we can't really connect to the subject matter without seeing video, without seeing people talk and interact and move. And that really was a wake-up call for me to say, if I want to reach young people, which I desperately do, because that's where social change happens, I think, with the youth, it's got to be a film. So those three forces got me thinking in this direction. So what I tried to do with this film is, I hope you'll find it does this, as a journalist, take a really objective kind of documentary look at this topic. Because if you sugarcoat a topic, if you make it look too easy, it doesn't help anybody. It's not credible. It's not credible to teachers, administrators, parents, anybody. So I tried to take a balanced look, but kind of show my passion as a parent for inclusion, and really trying to pick apart and show our journey and why it's been so important to us. So I want you to enjoy the film. I think it's not necessarily just like eating Brussels sprouts. It's a fun film to watch at times. My kids can be funny, some of the other people in the film can be funny. and it's challenging at times as well. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you about it afterwards. It's amazing, and I was saying to David earlier before the show, the thing that I'm really trying to do now is create partnerships with groups like you, because I think that that is the way that national movements happen, that is the way that real change happens. You can't do anything yourself. You have to collaborate, and I think collaborating with Inclusive Schools Network and hopefully EDC becomes a way that we can kind of get this part of our cultural dialogue, that this is not just about Samuel. This is not just about what's right for Samuel, what's right for Alana, what's right for Emily. This is really about what's right for our communities, what's right for our schools, what's right for our society. And I think that an important conversation to have is, why is this right for our society? Because I don't take it for granted that people just say, oh, inclusion's the right thing to do. Let's just do it. I don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that easy to sell to a lot of communities. I think there's a lot of concern, skepticism, confusion, misinformation about what this all means. So a couple of little anecdotes. Samuel loves to race out of the house every morning with me at 7:25 so he can meet all his friends at the tree and we can walk to school together. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I remember the walks to school more than I remember school, I think, in elementary school at least. And it's just this kind of cultural, social phenomenon where a lot of the way you engage with your peers is not even in the classroom, but it's about getting to know them in the classroom, having them get to know the nuances of your personality, your sense of humor. So having Samuel in the classroom, I think, has certainly benefited him, but I've seen ways it's benefited all the students and teachers. We have a lot of refugee resettlement happening in central New Hampshire. Maybe you have some of that here. A lot of refugees from Africa, from Iraq, from former Yugoslavia. And we had a child from Burundi come to the classroom last year to start school. And the kids were just inherently patient with this child. They were very tolerant of his way of communicating that was different from theirs. They really showed him compassion and wanted him to be accepted into the classroom. And his teacher, Ms. O'Brien, said that is because of Samuel. That is Samuel's gift to them, that kind of patience and compassion. And even beyond that, Ms. O'Brien says in the film, and I've heard this from teachers again and again and again, teaching an inclusive classroom has made me a better teacher, because it's forced me to find ways to reach all children in different ways of learning styles. So whether it's kinetic learning or experiential learning or auditory learning, they're finding ways to reach kids that are going to benefit all the kids in the classroom. So you have this child from Burundi who's benefiting, but let's say a child's grandparent has a stroke or develops Alzheimer's and suddenly is moving in different ways, communicating in different ways, maybe using a wheelchair. These kids are going to be exposed to the fact that disability is part of the natural diversity of our society. This is not something that should be separated out. And I hope that one day we see separate classrooms like we now would look at a classroom or a school where you've got a classroom for African Americans, a classroom for Latinos, a high school classroom for kids who have come out as being gay. You know, that kind of segregation, I think, would not be tolerated now. But frankly, it's still really being seen as the norm in most of the schools in our country. Inclusion is not the norm. Inclusion is sometimes more challenging, but I think the path of least resistance for administrators, for principals, for superintendents is separate classrooms and separate schools. I think that is literally the path of least resistance, because they can just put all these kids in a room and say, we'll hire a couple people, we'll teach them over there, and we'll kind of forget about them. I think inclusion is sometimes more challenging, but it gives so much to the classroom. And one last thing about that, I think when you think about teachers and what it does for the curriculum and for the community, I've heard again and again, it builds stronger communities. When you have kids of this kind of diversity, it teaches kids a lesson really early on that we're not all the same. There is diversity in our society, and disability is part of that diversity. So when they go out into the world, when they're working alongside people, living alongside people, commuting alongside people with disabilities, it's not this thing that freaks them out. It's just part of the natural world. And often, the people who are most reluctant to ask us questions are adults. They're not kids. Kids want to know. They want to kind of get this. And if you think about where we've come, you know, recycling is now the norm in many communities. In New Hampshire, we have civil unions. Who would have thought that, you know, years ago? But that is now the norm. So much has happened that you couldn't foresee happening, that I have a lot of hope that inclusion will someday be seen as the norm, but we've got a long way to go.